The Answer Coalition was formed on September 14th, 2001. That was just 3 days after the September 11th attacks. It was formed of a number of groups that were in Washington, D.C. who had been planning to organize around the IMF World Bank demonstrations. They were organizing about international and domestic issues. I got a flyer from one of those groups that said, "Beat back the Bush attack," which really excited me. I was 17 at the time, and I thought that sounded like a great idea.
It was formed in response to the instant swelling of anti-Arab, anti-Muslim sentiment that was growing in the United States at the time.
You know, this idea of this kind of false patriotism and this nationalism that had swept the entire country when so many were calling for war, and when there was this racist fervor against Arabs and Muslims.
The Bush administration, a right-wing administration, would use it as a way to launch assaults on people abroad and at home, launching wars against the people of Afghanistan almost immediately in October. And also going after Arab Americans and Muslims in the United States in a very vicious way.
It was so clear that they wanted to go after Afghanistan. They were using the September 11th as an excuse to get into the Middle East. And also racism, just racism like I had never seen in my lifetime against the Muslim and Arab population of the United States.
This is not the most opportune time to be starting an anti-war, anti-racist organization.
A lot of people were understandably very upset, but in the political movement, a number of organizations folded to the patriotic pressure.
Because of 9/11, everybody abandoned ship, but we stayed on, and that's when Answer was formed.
I received a phone call because I had given the organization that was sponsoring the Beat Back the Bush attacks, I'd given them my contact information, and I received a phone call saying that they had changed the focus of their demonstration to be against the war and against racism, and I thought, yes, that is what I want to do, that's where I want to be.
It was done so because of the correctness of the politics of the Answer Coalition and understanding the time period that we are entering, to understand the necessity to stand with all people who would be under attack and having their civil liberties violated.
The public response was very positive towards it, and it was made up of just about every single progressive organization you could possibly think of at the time.
So I went down and joined Answer the weekend that it was being formed, actually, officially in name. And we had our first anti-war demonstration, first national anti-war demonstration, September 29th, 2001. And we did manage to get thousands of people to Freedom Plaza to stand up against the new war drive.
20,000 people came out under the slogan, "War and racism is not the answer," which sounds like a mild slogan today, but it was all that could possibly work at the time.
From there on out, the Answer Coalition served as the leading anti-war organization in the United States.
Based on the East Coast, and also with chapters that kind of popped up quickly in other parts of the country, such as San Francisco and Los Angeles and elsewhere.
Seattle, Chicago, and other cities as well. And really, it wasn't just where we had Answer offices per se. It was organizations who were progressive groups across the country taking up the calls that we would put out. I believe that the first major milestone was October 26, 2002, which was a national day of protest against the call for war against Iraq. The Bush administration was making it very clear that they intended to invade Iraq, and they were putting up this facade of trying to find weapons of mass destruction at the time, which most people, I believe, who were coming out and voicing their dissent against the war didn't believe existed.
After 2002, and I think October 2002 marked the beginning of it. It became the high point of the anti-war movement in the U.S. So then there were the demonstrations that were happening in D.C. were massive. It was 100,000 people, 200,000 people would come to D.C. and there were a number of different organizations, but Answer always played a major role in initiating those demonstrations and in making sure that the demands of the demonstration included a complete withdrawal from Iraq now.
There were no voices coming either from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party that was anti-war. And so it became very clear that for any opposition to be heard against this call for war, it had to be in the form of a people's movement that would come out into the street and protest.
January 18th, 2003 was 500,000 people in Washington, D.C. It was the biggest demonstration that I've ever been a part of. It was called by the Answer Coalition. It was shortly before there was huge demonstrations in New York in February the following month. And I would say that that was the high point of the U.S. anti-war movement. That's when so many people came into the streets because they believed that if we came into the streets, if we all protested, we could stop the war before it started.
In February 2003, before the war in Iraq, there was a global day of action against the war, and it was really kind of the muscle flexing of the new anti-war movement, which was a bigger movement than had ever taken place in world history.
In just a matter of months, demonstrations that were in the thousands swelled to hundreds of thousands of people and millions in the streets across the country.
So there were like a couple of years of massive demonstrations that were just like huge. Like there were October 2002 through 2005, there were like demonstrations of a couple 100,000 people.
There was a lot of different groups organizing at that time around the country and even in South Florida where I was. And through my own observations of being a part of that action and studying the organization, I found Answer above all to be exactly what I was looking for in terms of politics, in terms of dedication, and in terms of real willingness and steadfastness in fighting and in confronting the Pentagon and confronting the war makers.
The Answer Coalition, unlike other organizations who went away after that time, was very steadfast in the call to stop the war and didn't give in to following any one politician or one political party. And we remained throughout that time an independent people's movement, and we still do today, 10 years later.
A lot of the groups, I should say, that I knew when I first came into the movement almost 10 years ago are not around today, or if they are, they're kind of shells of themselves. However, we have a lot of great allied organizations in many different movements, from the Filipino movement to the immigrant rights struggle to the LGBT struggle and beyond, that are still around, still strong. And they are the folks that have kind of worked with Answer all these years.
The whole time that we were organizing against the Iraq War, we would encounter people who said, why are you talking about racism? We're here against the war. And it's like, how could you have a war? The U.S. government cannot launch a war without racist dehumanization. Racism is such an important tool of imperialism. It has to be addressed up front, which is why I really liked, that's what inspired me to join the Answer Coalition. That's why Act Now to Stop War and End Racism is the name of our organization. We don't consider it a secondary struggle. It's part and parcel of the anti-war struggle.
We've never seen the anti-war movement existing in isolation. The anti-war movement has always been comprised of people who are tired of the status quo, who want to see change in this country take place. And at times the strongest voices for change in this country are coming from those who are opposing the war in Iraq, but sometimes they're coming from people who are dissatisfied with the way people are treated in this country.
Answer really speaks for the downtrodden and the national minorities here in the United States, especially Asian and Pacific Islanders, because basically we are always victims of racism, starting from the Chinese Exclusion Act until now, until the Filipino veterans are still unrecognized by the United States government. We are still fighting the war against racism.
In Los Angeles, also, and the issue of LGBT equality, or equality for same-sex couples, when Proposition 8 passed prohibiting same-sex marriage, Answer organized on just a couple days' notice a demonstration of over 20,000 people.
The immigrant rights movement that has taken place, especially in the past 5 years, where we've seen some of the largest demonstrations this country has ever seen.
On March 25th, 2006, Answer helped lead and participate in a mass demonstration that most people will have never seen in their lifetimes. It was 2 million people almost in the streets of Los Angeles. I mean, it's hard to quantify actually, but it was certainly over 1 million, and many people say up to 2. That was a huge, huge thing, something that was very noteworthy on the national level, because that sparked a mass upsurge in the immigrant rights community, and it kind of heralded the beginning of a new civil rights movement for immigrants, undocumented people, people who desperately and deservedly need recognition under the law as it is. And I also think one thing that's very common in almost all urban areas is intervening in the struggle to stop police brutality, police violence, something that Answer didn't do right at the beginning. But as a group that is unique, because it not only fights against war, but also against racism and bigotry, that struggle to stop police violence, which is, mainly targets poor people, people of color, that's an important one.
We believe that all of these issues are connected, that it's all the same. It's the same government and the same corporations who are sponsoring these budget cuts, who are profiting from these wars, who are calling for these wars. And you can't address one without addressing the other. And some people worried that it would drive people away from the movement if we couldn't have complete unity on all the issues. But we believe that it makes the movement stronger, that bringing everyone's concerns and everyone's issues to the table can only further unite people.
I should say that Answer's not entering all of these movements to take over demonstrations or just to build a demonstration here or there. We have organizers in all these different communities from all different nationalities and backgrounds. We are already organizing on these issues. I think the main thing that it brings to the movement, other than political clarity and the ability to kind of struggle or fight on many different fronts at once, is that fact that we have people who are already doing that and who want to see the connections, build the connections between these movements, and kind of move forward into one big people's struggle on a lot of different issues, because many different issues intersect.
Prior to 2002 and the anti-war movement in the United States, the issue of Palestine was really a taboo subject. There was a great deal of resistance from the elements within the movement that wanted to raise the issue of justice for Palestine. Answer had within its leadership Palestinian organizations and activists, and all of those who were in the leadership, whether Arab or not, felt very strongly that to talk about the war in Iraq and ending the war in Iraq, you must talk about the occupation of Palestine as well.
April 20, 2002 was the first national demonstration in support of the Palestinian people that happened in the United States.
Where 100,000 people came out in Washington, D.C. supporting the Palestinians. That was a big milestone because it started the discourse in the anti-war movement, moving away from the single slogan, "Stop the war," to including Palestine as an integral part of the anti-war movement.
And it was a struggle. The Answer Coalition was the convener of that demonstration. We called that demonstration. And it was the second time that we found ourselves up against all the traditional movement forces who were telling us that it wasn't a good protest to pursue, that it wasn't a good time to protest. And we really had to push forward and fight and drag the movement with us kicking and screaming to recognizing the right of Palestinians and supporting the Palestinian struggle.
Every demonstration, there was always a speaker talking about the occupation of Palestine, about the right of return for Palestinians, something that had never really taken place before 2002 in any significant way.
We really witnessed a growing and surging anti-war movement under the Bush administration. Now, we really saw, quite a bit of a decline when then candidate Barack Obama was ascending in the Democratic Party once he had won the Democratic nomination, and then an even bigger decline when he won the presidency.
There was a significant change in the movement when Obama was elected, and a lot of those people that we used to see coming in to put together placards for anti-war protests were the same ones you might see in an Obama campaign office.
Many major anti-war organizations, just folded and shut down their offices and stopped having demonstrations, and there was a real, feeling around a large part of the anti-war movement that there had been this victory that was won, and that the being in the streets wasn't really the priority anymore at that time.
The political climate has changed, but the fact of the matter is now I think there's a deepened level of consciousness based on those struggles against the wars, and also based on the difficult and declining living standards for people, economic life for people in the United States right now. So there's been a whole new layer of folks who've kind of come around in the past several years, mainly very, very young people, community college students, people who are finding it hard to find a job, people who are kind of making those connections that we have seen even after the election of Obama, and in some cases more pointedly after the election of Obama.
The politics of the Democratic Party have been one and the same as the Republican Party, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And so the wars have not ended, and we still have remained relevant even in light of the change in government that's taken place over the past several years.
The Answer Coalition continued to organize demonstrations and anti-war pickets and rallies and actions as they would if Bush was still in office. And it was that consistency of continuing to lay the foundations, of continuing to do the necessary work that in a lot of ways has really kept the anti-war movement alive, through this period of euphoria and fantasizing after Obama was elected. And so the fact that there's still been mass marches, and that the politicians, even Obama himself, is confronted with anti-war actions wherever he's showing his face. This is something very significant.
Until there is no more war, there will need to be anti-war coalitions doing that work, and conditions have only gotten worse. The U.S. military drive is only expanding, while resistance is increasing around the world as well. And so it's important that people see that resistance within the United States is increasing, that resistance in the U.S. is stepping up, and that an organization is there to provide leadership and to unite all the different struggles.
There's this really common thing that people say when it comes to protests and demonstrations. What is this really accomplishing? It's just a bunch of people holding signs. And there's this kind of, overall demoralization among people in the country because, the wars continued and the wars raged on. But what I have witnessed being involved in the Answer Coalition for several years now is that it has brought to the fore an entire new generation of young people, of students, of workers, into being leaders and organizers in the anti-war movement, in the anti-racist movement, in the progressive grassroots organizing movement.
I think making more connections with new people and finding political commonality, making allies, and solidifying friendships, that's going to be the way that Answer will survive through the next 10 years. And I think it's definitely possible that will happen. I think it will happen.
I think it succeeded in achieving a milestone of 10 years, which is a very significant milestone for a progressive, grassroots, anti-imperialist movement.
The struggle is only growing, and we've seen in recent days Occupy Wall Street. We saw the struggles bringing up in Madison, all across across Europe. There were demonstrations against austerity. We saw it happen in the Middle East as well. As long as these issues of capitalism and issues of militarism and war continue to get worse, the struggle is only going to draw in more people to fight back. And the Answer Coalition is there to help organize the people, help call demonstrations, and help lead the way.
And until now, we are still hitting the streets to protest the wars of aggression because it takes away from people's interests, it takes away from the workers and everybody here in the United States.
In order to have any sort of change for anyone in this country, there has to be people who are coming out publicly in the streets or in the form of protests. And so those of us in the Answer Coalition will go anywhere people are going out to struggle. And that's where we meet people, and that's how we've built a movement in this country for change.